Department of Health is urging all visitors and residents to avoid coming in contact with any of the blue-green algae being found.
When Florida reduced Lake Okeechobee by only 4 feet, something old and disturbing began to awaken beneath the water. Huge islands of invasive plants started slowly sliding across the lake bed, dragging insects, toxic bacteria, and secrets hidden for hundreds of years. As NASA satellites tracked moving vegetation from space, prehistoric artifacts and even human remains began emerging from the mud below. The Big O suddenly turned into a living time capsule and a dangerous warning. But what was really revealed when the lake bottom started to shift? And what else is still buried, waiting for the next drop in water? The lake that holds Florida together. Lake Okeechobee is far more than a body of water in central Florida. It is a lifeline that holds the entire state together. Rain collects in this enormous basin. Rivers pour into it from every direction. The Everglades rely completely on water flowing south from its edges. Farms throughout the region depend on it. Millions of residents drink water that begins its journey right here. When the lake is full, its surface looks wide, calm, and stable. But when water levels fall, everything begins to change. Locals call it the Big O. Scientists describe it as shallow, sensitive, and dangerously overloaded with nutrients. The lake spans 730 square miles, yet it rarely grows deeper than 9 or 10 feet. Despite its size, this enormous lake is extremely fragile. When water levels drop, whether from drought or controlled releases, the bottom of the lake does not remain still. Vast mats of invasive plants loosen from the sediment and slowly slide across the lake bed, carrying entire living systems with them into new and unfamiliar areas. Why the water was lowered. Lake Okeechobee is no longer controlled by nature alone. Today, the water is managed by the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Their responsibility is to protect people, farmland, and nearby communities from flooding, while also trying to preserve the lake's overall health. Encircling the lake is the Herbert Hoover Dike. This enormous earthen barrier runs nearly 143 miles in an almost complete ring. The structure is old and has endured decades of constant pressure. It was never designed to safely hold extremely high water levels forever. After devastating hurricanes in 1926 and 1928 caused floodwaters to overtop early levees and kill more than 2,500 people, the federal government built the Herbert Hoover Dike. Construction began in 1932 and finished in 1968. By the late 1990s, engineers realized the dike was dangerously weakening. A $1.5 billion rehabilitation project took 18 years to complete, finally ending in January 2023, just 2 years before the structure would face its first serious test. When heavy rainfall threatens the dike's stability, water must be released from the lake. After major storms, levels are intentionally lowered using a system called the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual, known as LOSM. The Army Corps follows these guidelines to determine when billions of gallons of water need to flow out through gates and spillways. In December 2024, the Army Corps made a decision to lower the lake by 4 feet from nearly 16 feet above sea level. This came after Hurricanes Helene and Milton delivered record rainfall across the watershed, pushing water levels into dangerous territory. To protect underwater vegetation that provides essential habitat for fish, massive releases were sent east to the St. Lucie River and west to the Caloosahatchee River. This was not a simple draining of the lake. It was a carefully planned operation that reshaped Florida's waterways. The decision saved lives, but also awakened the lake bed beneath the water. What happens when the lake drains? As water flows out to the spillways, oxygen quickly disappears from the newly exposed mud. Fish trapped in shrinking pools struggle to breathe. Birds gather by the hundreds to feed, while alligators remain still, waiting along the edges. The lake floor does not dry evenly across its enormous surface. Some areas bake under Florida sun, cracking and hardening. Other sections stay dark, soft, and black, packed with organic sediment that has built up over decades. These uneven conditions allow movement to begin. The movement is slow but steady. Mats of vegetation drift between 30 and 100 feet each day, depending on wind and remaining water flow. Once this process starts, It cannot be stopped. Mud slowly slides toward lower ground. Plant roots loosen their hold on the bottom. Enormous vegetation mats break free from the sediment. The lake floor itself appears to shift and crawl. At first, it resembles shadows gliding across the exposed lake bed. Then clear lines form where nothing existed before. Green shapes slowly rise from the surface. Brown mats begin sliding sideways, even when there is no wind to push them. This movement is not life in the way animals are alive. Nothing is making a conscious decision to move. Yet the system behaves like a living organism under pressure. There is no hidden creature beneath the water. This is biology responding to sudden environmental stress. One of the most aggressive movers is hydrilla. This submersed aquatic plant is not native to Florida. It was introduced from Asia and spread rapidly through the state's waterways. Hydrilla grows at an incredible speed, reaching the surface in thick tangles. It expands outward, forming dense underwater forests that block sunlight needed by native plants. Torpedo grass acts in a similar way. Today, it covers more than 14,000 acres of Lake Okeechobee. In 1997, a wildfire burned 6,000 acres of torpedo grass in the Northwest Marsh. Just 6 weeks later, the grass had already regrown to 8 inches tall. It rebounds faster than native vegetation after almost any disturbance. From above, satellite images show what appear to be islands moving without wind or current. These floating masses can travel for miles between wet and dry seasons. Scientists now monitor their movement from space using NASA satellites and advanced imaging technology. Why this movement is dangerous. These drifting vegetation mats do not travel across the lake by themselves. They carry entire ecosystems of unwanted passengers along with them. Insects cling tightly to plant stems. Snails attach themselves to leaves. Bacteria multiply within the wet vegetation. Seeds from invasive plants ride along, spreading into new areas. Invasive apple snails are especially destructive. Their bright pink egg clusters stick to plant stems above the waterline. As vegetation mats drift into different parts of the lake, these snails are carried into regions they could never reach on their own. Red imported fire ants also use floating plants as survival rafts during floods, forming large colonies on drifting vegetation. When water levels rise again, these plants settle in entirely new locations. They quickly smother whatever was growing there before. Native grasses are crushed beneath thick layers of invasive growth before they have a chance to take root. One native plant is hit harder than any other. Scientists call it Vallisneria americana. Most people know it as tape grass or eelgrass. This submersed plant is essential to the health of Lake Okeechobee. Tape grass feeds fish. Those fish feed birds. The birds support the entire ecosystem above the water. When tape grass disappears, the chain collapses. Bass lose their spawning grounds. Bluegill lose their main food source. The entire fishery begins to fail. According to Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission data, Lake Okeechobee's recreational fishing industry generates around $298 million each year. World-class bass fishing draws anglers from across the nation. When drifting invasive islands take over, bays can no longer find safe places to lay eggs. The native underwater meadows they depend on are destroyed. In 2023, several major fishing tournaments were canceled. Boat ramps became completely blocked by thick mats of vegetation. In some areas, access to the lake was impossible. When water levels dropped in 2021, the South Florida Water Management District discovered there were 20% more invasive plants than previously estimated. Airplanes were deployed to spray herbicides across the exposed lake bed. Without aggressive control, torpedo grass would spread across every available stretch of shoreline. Florida spends roughly $2 million each year managing torpedo grass in flood control structures alone. The plant is classified as a Category 1 invasive species, meaning it actively pushes out native vegetation and permanently alters entire ecosystems. The invisible chemistry below. The lake bottom is packed with nutrients, far more than the system can safely handle. For decades, runoff from surrounding farms has loaded the sediment with phosphorus and nitrogen. In small amounts, these nutrients help plants grow. In excessive concentrations, they turn toxic. When water levels remain high, these chemicals stay locked deep inside oxygen-starved mud. Oxygen cannot reach them, so they remain mostly inactive. But when the lake level drops, the chemistry shifts completely. Sunlight strikes the wet sediment. The surface dries and splits apart. Bacteria wake up and begin breaking down organic material. Gases start rising from below. Algae begins forming even before water returns. The exposed mud becomes a perfect breeding ground. Cyanobacteria, spores that survive within the sediment, suddenly find ideal conditions to grow. This process is well documented by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and university scientists. When water rises again after drawdown, algae blooms rapidly spread across the surface. Some blooms cover more than half of the lake's entire 730 square miles. At their peak, the lake transforms into a thick layer of bright neon green slime. The color comes from cyanobacteria, often called blue-green algae. These microscopic organisms are among the oldest life forms on Earth. They use photosynthesis like plants but behave more like bacteria. The stench travels for miles around the lake. People describe it as rotting trash mixed with dead fish. Dogs that drink the water become seriously ill. Fish suffocate by the thousands as algae strips oxygen from the water. Cyanobacteria release powerful toxins known as microcystins and cylindrospermopsin. These substances damage liver tissue and can affect the nervous system. They pose serious risks to human health and are deadly to pets and wildlife. In March 2024, testing in the St. Lucie Canal recorded microcystin levels of 17 parts per billion, more than twice the EPA's recreational safety limit of 8 parts per billion. At 4 rivers on the St. Lucie River, levels reach 11 parts per billion, still far above what is considered safe. This toxic water does not remain confined to the lake. When the Army Corps releases water to protect the dike, billions of gallons move east and west. The St. Lucie River carries it toward the Atlantic Ocean, while the Caloosahatchee River sends it into the Gulf of Mexico. Coastal estuaries suffer severe damage as a result. Manatees lose their food when toxic freshwater destroys seagrass beds. During a major event from 2021 to 2022 in the Indian River Lagoon, more than 1,100 manatees died, the highest annual death toll ever recorded. While not every death was directly caused by Lake Okeechobee releases, the toxic discharges played a role in the loss of seagrass. Oyster populations collapsed, and commercial fishing operations shut down for months. Environmental groups on both coasts report widespread harm. The Indian River Lagoon, already weakened by decades of pollution, receives additional toxic loads during large water releases. Communities like Stewart and Fort Myers experience major economic losses in tourism, recreation, and real estate. What the moving mud reveals. As plants shift and the sediment dries, the ancient past begins to surface. Drifting vegetation mats act like slow-moving plows, scraping across the lake bed and disturbing sediment layers that seal these objects away for centuries. Human bone fragments appear in the cracked mud. Shell tools rise to the surface after hundreds of years underground. Pieces of pottery break through the hardened crust. Archaeologists confirm these discoveries belong to people who lived around the lake thousands of years ago. The Belle Glade culture, followed later by the Calusa people, built entire civilizations here when the area was mostly dry land. Fort Center, located near Fish-Eating Creek northwest of Lake Okeechobee, remained occupied for more than 2,000 years, from about 450 years before the Common Era until roughly 1700. The Calusa dominated South Florida from at least 500 years before the Common Era until the 16th century, when Spanish contact began. Their territory stretched from Tampa Bay to the Florida Keys and inland to Lake Okeechobee. The Miami people who lived directly along the lake were under Calusa control. Unlike most Native American societies, the Calusa developed a highly organized culture based entirely on fishing instead of farming. They engineered complex canal networks. They built massive shell mounds rising as high as 30 feet. They also created wooden carvings that survived for centuries in oxygen-free mud, including detailed figures of animals and humans. When extreme droughts lowered Lake Okeechobee in 2006 and 2007, the exposed lakebed revealed artifacts archaeologists had never documented before. Wooden posts that once supported homes emerged from the mud. In some locations, evidence appeared of villages built on wooden platforms over shallow water, similar to ancient lake settlements found in Neolithic Europe. Over time, rising water levels slowly drowned their world. When modern drawdowns expose the lake bottom, these long-lost homes speak again through broken pottery and shell tools. Mixed among these ancient treasures are modern objects with far darker stories. Sunken boats sit abandoned in the mud like ghost ships. Rusted engines remain half-buried. Metal vehicle frames rise into view as the water retreats. Some of these objects came from tragic accidents. Powerful storms turned the shallow lake into a violent washing machine. Small boats capsized. People drowned. Their vessels sank and were never recovered. Others were placed there intentionally by people trying to hide crimes or avoid financial trouble. During extreme droughts, when the shoreline pulls back by more than a mile, the landscape takes on a post-apocalyptic appearance. People walking across exposed flats discover rusted frames of 1950s pickup trucks standing upright where 10 feet of water once covered them. Encircling the lake is a vast network of sugarcane fields and citrus groves. For more than a century, agriculture has surrounded these shores. Old machinery, heavy metals, and industrial chemicals have slowly collected on the lake bed. When the water disappears, debris fields emerge like apparitions. Abandoned irrigation pumps lie half-buried. Corroded pesticide drums leak residue into the exposed soil. The lake bottom becomes a physical record of Florida's rapid and often reckless growth. During the historic 2007 drought, falling water exposed so much accumulated waste that the state launched large-scale cleanup operations. Crews discovered everything from discarded household appliances and thousands of old tires to ancient human remains within the same square mile. The result was a disturbing blend of ancient history and modern pollution. The lake bed contains clear layers, like pages in a history book, shell fragments from collusive middens, mud laid down over centuries, metal from 20th century industrialization, plastic from the modern age. Each layer represents a chapter in Florida's transformation. Sediment core studies confirm this layering. The deeper scientists drill, the further back in time the story goes. As vegetation mats continue to move, they scrape across these layers, uncovering pieces that have remained hidden for generations. Climate pressure on the system. Weather patterns are growing more extreme. Between 2020 and 23, Lake Okeechobee experienced water level changes of more than 5 feet within a single year 6 different times. In the previous 50 years combined, this happened only twice. Long periods of drought are now followed suddenly by intense and overwhelming rainfall. We now see rapid shifts from record flooding that threatens to overtop the levee to record droughts that expose the lake's darkest layers. A system that once remained relatively stable has been pushed beyond its limits. Scientists track the movement of vegetation mats from space using advanced satellite technology. NASA monitors the lake weekly through several imaging systems. The data confirms that these plant islands travel miles as conditions shift between wet and dry seasons. This is measured evidence, not speculation. The rehabilitation of the Herbert Hoover Dike was completed specifically because climate-driven extremes increase the risk of structural failure. Some residents living near the lake believe the water itself is responding to decades of damage. They see the movement as a form of reaction. Science explains it differently, but arrives at a similar conclusion. This is environmental feedback. When ecosystems are pushed beyond their ability to absorb stress, they respond in visible ways. The movement is not intentional. Plants do not decide to migrate. Sediment does not move with awareness. Yet the behavior still carries meaning. It reveals a system deeply out of balance. The crawling vegetation, toxic algae blooms, massive fish die-offs, and shifting islands amok are all signs of an ecosystem in crisis. The lake is sending a clear message that something has gone seriously wrong. Large areas of the lake have never completely dried in modern history. Even during severe droughts, deeper sections remain underwater. What lies there stays hidden until the next extreme drawdown. Ancient Calusa dugout canoes may still rest below the current waterline. The oldest would have been carved from cypress or pine using fire and shell tools. More shell tools and wooden artifacts likely survived in the oxygen-free mud. Entire structures from ancient settlements may still be concealed. This possibility is based on discoveries made in shallower areas, though it has not yet been confirmed. The lake holds its deepest secrets until changing conditions force them into the open. The future of the Big O. Protecting Lake Okeechobee starts with controlling agricultural runoff. Farms must cut the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen entering the watershed. Recent research from Florida Atlantic University shows that managing phosphorus alone is not enough. Both nutrients must be reduced together to prevent harmful cyanobacteria blooms. Restoring native plant communities is also critical. Tape grass and other submerged vegetation form the foundation of the entire food web. Without them, the lake's fishery collapses. Carefully balancing water releases is essential to protect both the lake's internal ecology and the downstream estuaries. The Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual tries to maintain this balance, though environmental groups argue that current operations still cause serious damage to coastal waters. The Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan includes 68 major infrastructure projects designed to send more water south to the Everglades during dry seasons. Approved in 2000, SERP's estimated cost has grown from $7.8 billion to over $23 billion. After nearly 25 years, fewer than 20% of the projects are complete. At the current pace, full completion will take decades more. The Herbert Hoover Dike restoration allows water managers to maintain higher, more stable lake levels without risking catastrophic failure. This should help reduce some of the extreme swings that stress the ecosystem. Progress continues, but slowly. The engineering challenges are enormous, and funding is limited. The lake is not dead, but it is under severe stress. Every drawdown reveals more evidence of that strain. When water levels drop, the lake remembers. The mud shifts. Invasive plants drift into new areas. Buried history rises to the surface again. Nothing happening beneath the water is random. Nothing stays completely still when conditions change. Lake Okeechobee no longer hides its secrets. It reveals them every time the water falls. More than Florida's largest freshwater lake, Lake Okeechobee has become a 730 square mile warning system. Moving vegetation, drifting invasive plants, exposed toxic sediments, and uncovered artifacts all show an ecosystem pushed beyond its limits. Each drawdown exposes new evidence of stress. Unless Florida fundamentally changes its water management and farming practices, Lake Okeechobee will continue unveiling darker secrets with every drop in its water level.